Welcome back. Now, Kenya's economy grew faster than expected in the first quarter of 2023 after the agriculture sector snapped 4 consecutive quarters of contraction. Gross domestic product in the first 3 months of 2023 rose 5.3% year on year, the fastest quarterly growth in a year. Now, that's according to Kenya's National Bureau of Statistics. Matt Kindiga, practice leader, Sub-Saharan Africa, joins me now. Good afternoon, Matt. It's good to have you on the program. Well, Matt, what do you make of this latest GDP growth figures? Tell us about how this impacts the health of the Kenyan economy.
Hi, well, thanks for having me on the program today. So certainly, as you mentioned, it is data that has been surprising to the positive. So Kenya's fastest growth in over a year, and also a substantial improvement on Q4 2023 when the economy slowed to 3.7% year on year. As we have seen, really interestingly, a broad-based improvement in growth, and this is extremely positive for Kenya. And this does suggest that actually Kenya's economy is doing a lot better than we previously expected. The agriculture industry has posted its first growth in about 6 quarters, which is very positive after a very protracted drought there, but also a number of sectors, including very important sectors for Kenya's economic diversification, including ICT, hospitality, retail trade, financial services, all grew by more than headline GDP growth. So they grew by, at least 6 or 7% year on year. And what this does suggest is that despite the social unrest that Kenya saw earlier this year, so in the first quarter of this year, we were expecting to see economic growth slow down because of the protests that were taking place, and also because of very severe foreign currency shortages that the country was facing. It looks as if these haven't had as negative an effect on the economy as we were expecting. And what this all means is actually that we are probably going to be revising up our growth forecast for Kenya to about 4 or 5% this year. So certainly, quite an optimistic view for the market over the course of the next 12 months.
So how will the government's new finance bill affect the economy this year?
Yeah, so one of the reasons why we were expecting a more pronounced slowdown in Kenya's growth outlook was because of very weak public finances. So public finances have deteriorated quite consistently, but also at a much faster pace over the last 6 months or so. And the government, through its new finance bill, its 2023 finance bill, is raising taxes and cutting spending. And these are very unpopular with the private sector, with households, and with private businesses. And this is because it will be raising income taxes, consumption taxes, digital transaction taxes, for example, introducing a higher rate of value-added tax on fuel. So we certainly expect there to be a bit of a reduction in sentiment, maybe over the next few months, perhaps a bit of a slowdown in domestic consumption and investment in Q3, perhaps. But I will emphasize that the new finance bill is part of a broader set of measures that the government is introducing in order to consolidate public finances and to avoid a state of debt distress emerging, and in a worst case scenario, a default next year. So this is really quite positive for the longer term economic outlook for Kenya, especially as we look to 2024. We believe that this will boost investor sentiment in the long term. It also will mean that the shilling is likely to stabilize a bit as a result of improved investor sentiment as the government stabilizes its public finances.
So we do know that the Central Bank of Kenya is seeing a 5.5% GDP growth overall by the end of the year. Do you share this opinion or this forecast?
So we're not quite as optimistic. I wouldn't expect to see the economy reach quite 5.5%. We probably, as I mentioned, we are probably going to expect to see a little bit of a slowdown in Q3, and then a bit of an uptick in economic growth as the first effects of the finance bill begin to sort of recede a bit. So we're probably forecasting growth of between 4 and 5%, maybe 4.5% as a base case and 5% as an upside. So certainly, a bit more optimistic than we were previously expecting, but not quite 5.5%.
And so what does the future look like for the shilling? I do know it has been taking a pounding recently.
Yeah, so unfortunately, the shilling really has been taking a pounding, as you said. It has lost substantial value since the start of this year. Pretty much every week it reaches a fresh record low against the dollar. It's currently at about 140 per dollar. We are forecasting further depreciation to about 150 per dollar. So we would expect it to reach about 150 per dollar by the end of this year, after which it will probably stabilize a bit. There are a couple of things driving down the value of the shilling. So it has been kept artificially high by the central bank. It is still overvalued in our view. Kenya does have quite a substantial current account deficit. And we are going to see, consistent pressures on emerging market currencies driven by further interest rate increases by the US Federal Reserve, for example. And because Kenya's economy will be sucking in imports because it is growing quite well and exports are relatively muted, this will put a bit more downward pressure on the currency. However, in 2024, as the economy begins to accelerate, as we can begin to see an improvement in tourist arrivals as well in the country, we would expect to see a bit of a stabilization in the currency. We don't expect it to fall much beyond 155 per dollar in 2024. So some more weakening this year, followed by a bit more stabilization in 2024.
Thank you so much, Matt. I do know you'll be keeping track of that at Frontier View, and you'll be keeping us up to date as well. Thank you so much, Matt Kiniga, Practice Leader, Sub-Saharan Africa, Frontier View, for sharing your insights.
Great. Thanks for having me on the program today.